We have two bills. One, House File 2 is going to be second in line, but House File 1 is going to be before us here as we speak. So Representative Anderson, if you would like to move to the testifiers table. And as you are not a member of this committee, perhaps your cousin, Paul Anderson, would like to move the bill to come before the committee.
I would be honored, Mr. Chair. I'd move House File 1.
Where's it going? And the referral will be to move the bill to Human Services. And Representative Anderson, P.E., we'll just call you, yeah, anyway, too many Andersons in the world. Go ahead, and I believe also that you have an author's amendment to put the bill in the shape that you would prefer, and I will move your A1 on your behalf. So the A1 will come before us.
It's 2.
Oh, that's right. So you have the A1 and then you have the DE to the A1,
Yeah.
if I'm correct. So we will have to move the A1 first to be brought before us, and then we'll have to move the DE to the A1. So I will do that on your behalf. Lead Cleavorn.
I think I'm confused. So the A1 goes to the original bill?
Correct. And then the author has a DE to the A1.
Okay.
No, actually, other way around.
Yeah,
So,
it's the other way
yes, the other way around. We'll get there.
Okay.
Lots of amendments flying around today.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I have a clarification. So the A1 is to the original bill as drafted, or to the DE?
It's, the A1 is to the DE.
So, okay, so do we want to move the DE
We'll
first?
move the
and-
DE first.
Perfect, that's what I was confused by.
So
Thank
we're
you.
going to move the DE first. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? And now we will move the DE to the A1, or the A1 to the DE, whatever it is. It's still early and I haven't had enough caffeine, but we're moving that amendment to the other amendment. And Mr. Sullivan will throw something at me if I'm doing this out of turn. I can feel it behind me. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so the bill is now in the form that you would like. Representative Anderson, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Chair Nash and members, and thank you to Representative P.H. Anderson. So I do have to, a little note, we constantly get each other's legislation sent to the wrong place, so please be careful when you're the H and the E, and when you're sending things to us. So it's, anyway, thank you. I'm going to just start out briefly, and then we can get into some of the details and maybe with the amendments. That would be helpful. House File 1 is essentially, we call it the fraud bill. It creates an Office of Inspector General within, under the Legislative Audit Commission. And let me talk briefly why under the Legislative Audit Commission. There are that body is very nonpartisan and has functioned incredibly well throughout decades of the time that it's existed. It has 3 members from each body, House, Senate, Republican, Democrat, and is very nonpartisan and it's independent and it's worked. I sit on the Legislative Audit Commission, but it's worked throughout time. And so it made sense to put this OIG in that same position because what we want is we want this to be a nonpartisan, non-political office that has authority and autonomy so they can actually do their job without threats from anyone or any angle. And that is what this bill proposes to do. As you know, there's over $500 million worth of fraud that has already been is being prosecuted, essentially, a lot of it. And we expect that there's going to be a lot more that's coming out. This isn't just a Minnesota problem. We see that. We've also seen that in other states and at the federal level. But according to, Prosecutor Lugar, this is the worst. Minnesota is the worst of the fraud. It has the worst fraud of any state in the country. So we have to do something about it. And I think that we all want to do something about it, all of us. Again, this isn't a partisan issue. I'll give you a little history about the OIG. We currently have OIGs in about 6, I think it's 6 of our agencies. They are appointed by the governor, and they are very agency-specific. The biggest are in DHS, and then MDE, which was created just recently, a couple years ago. That hasn't worked. We've seen that, and it hasn't worked. And this bill proposes to leave staff embedded within the agencies, but to bring the authority into an independent office of Inspector General. On Monday, I sit on the fraud committee too, and on Monday, the Office of Grants Management presented to us. This is an office that had like 4 employees, and then if you recall, in 2023, we expanded that to up to 12. I believe they have 9 currently. And they talked about what they've been doing with grants recently. I was a little surprised that I thought they were doing more, in the sense more oversight. They've been doing policies and procedures and setting things up like that to help state staff, but they haven't had really that heavy oversight function. And I can tell, I know there's one of the authors' amendments is about the grants, and there's ongoing discussion. It is our intention to separate that, to leave the Office of Grants Management within the Department of Administration, but to take a few of those functions and give them to the OIG. So this latest DE is going to change on Thursday. This is a work in progress. And we're taking any and all good ideas from anyone, in fact, including the commissioners. So I did want to point that out. Tonight at 5:30, unless I'm back here in this committee, we're going to be meeting with the Senate again. This is joint. This will probably follow with Senator Gustafson's bill. That'll probably be the companion in the Senate. We're meeting with them, and we're going to be bringing in some members of the administration eventually so that we can make this function and work. We have already met with other OIGs across the nation to try to get ideas. They come in all shapes and forms, frankly. And we have to do what we think makes sense for Minnesota. And so that's, again, part of this bill. I can go through all the other details, maybe things that we intend to keep in the bill as it evolves throughout the committees. The OIG should have embedded staff within the agencies because there are functions that the agencies, those staff need to know what's happening within the individual agencies. We understand that. We also understand that some of the OIG kind of functions under some of the departments do things that probably shouldn't be removed. There are people that just look at Social Security numbers. They look at, different things that probably should stay within the agencies themselves. And so we understand that. And as I said, as this evolves, we're going to do this right. It's my goal to create an agency to do this right so that we can avoid the issues that we've had. So I want to leave it at that, and if we can go to the amendments and we can have a good discussion. Thank you.
I believe Lead Cleavorn had a clarifying question for you, Representative Anderson. Lead Cleavorn.
Thank you.
Actually, Chair, this is to you. We are hearing from the testifier that in committee today, we are hearing a bill that is not the bill. I'm not exactly sure why we're hearing this bill today.
Representative
If
Cleavorn?
it's not in the form, we are the first committee of jurisdiction. We should be hearing this bill. Is it coming back to us?
Representative Cleavorn, I will remind you of the last 2 years. There were a number of bills that were moving through the committee when you were chair that I believe principally paid family medical leave came into committee, and there was an understanding that it was going to be amended at its next committee stop, and that was stated by the bill author at that time. I believe the marijuana bill from its author was also purported to be coming into committee, but would see substantive changes along the way. So The bill before us is a bill as amended, and what happens to it after it leaves committee is immaterial to what is happening to us today here in committee. So we will move on to the A2. I believe, Representative Clardy, that is your amendment?
We did vote on the A1.
Yeah, we did.
We did.
It was engrossed.
It was engrossed, yeah.
Representative Clardy.
Okay, so this amendment removes the exemption of rulemaking from the OIG, allowing them.
Excuse me, we did not, we voted on the DE, we did not vote on the A1. If the bill is better with the A1.
Believe we voted on both,
I would
but
ask,
if you would like to, we can,
clarification, did we do them and we had one vote?
believe there were 2 votes.
Were there?
Do you,
I wrote down that the A1 was adopted, but I see that there are other recollections of what happened.
The DE was voted on, but the A1, I'm asking, was the A1 voted on? I don't have it as written as voting on it.
well,
I would prefer the A1 on it.
Lead Cleaver, we did engross, and Mr. Sullivan from Nonpartisan was tracking it as well, that both the DE and the A1 was engrossed into. So, I mean, from an official report perspective, House Nonpartisan, who does track this, has said that it went in. So if you would like, we can vote on the A1 again, if that makes you happy.
I don't recall, I only heard us take one vote.
Okay, so the A1 has been moved by Representative Paul Anderson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, now we have that out of the way. So Representative Clardy, to your A2 amendment, would you like to move the A2?
So moved.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So the amendment removes the exemption for rulemaking from the OIG, allowing them to bypass the rulemaking process. And given the broad scope of the bill and the unique provisions and powers that the OIG has, they should be subject to the normal process, which is allows for public notice and public comment.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. We did look at this last night, pulling out the rulemaking. The question, this is what's within other OIGs. This is what's within the Legislative Audit Commission, or within the legislative auditors. And so the question I would have is why? Why the because I'm open to things, but, this would need to be discussed in depth, but why would you propose that?
Kobe, can I just call on you for
Representative Clardy, would we like to speak through the chair?
thank you, Chair Nash.
Thank you.
Could I call on Kobe for like a further explanation of
You'd like
rulemaking?
House Nonpartisan to go to the testifiers table to provide greater detail for you? Mr. Sullivan, if you would. As he's making his way there, if you would like to frame your question so that he can answer it directly. Representative Clardy.
Okay, so typically, there is a period of time for the public to have a notice and also do comments on a bill. Is this something that's standard in bills, or could you explain kind of what the process of rulemaking is?
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Chair and Representative Clardy, yes, you're correct that with the formal rulemaking process, there's public notice, there's opportunity for public comment, there's often a public hearing where additional testimony can be taken, and then the agency has to often submit a statement of need and reasonableness that explains why the rules are necessary, what other options they considered. I would note that in this case, because the OIG would be within the legislative branch, I'm not aware of legislative entities going through the formal rulemaking process. In the A1 amendment, actually another instance of rulemaking authority was eliminated from the bill, I believe, for that same reason.
Yeah.
Representative Clardy.
Thank you.
Lead Cleaver.
Thank you. So, Mr. Sullivan, if you please stay seated. So I'm a little bit confused. So we are going to then give the OIG, because it says that 5 and 7, and I may be wrong about that. So if we go into the bill 5.6 to 5.10, right? If we allow these lines to stand, and I'm just trying to really understand the intent, okay? And we are giving the OIG the whole ability to write the policies and procedures, are we just allowing the OIG then to write law? Because if I understand statute 14.386, E at the very bottom of that statute, it says if a statute provides that a rule is exempt from Chapter 14 and Section 14.386, then the rule has the force of law. So are we giving the OIG the ability to write law without going through the committee process? I'm just
Sullivan.
trying to understand if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah.
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Chair and Representative Cleaborn, I don't think it has the effect of writing law without the rulemaking process. I think this is very similar to the Office of the Legislative Auditor and the policies and procedures that it has developed to govern its work, which are subject to review by the Legislative Audit Commission, and don't then have, I don't think they really have a real-world effect like a law would on the rights of citizens. They really just govern the operations of the office.
Lead Cleaborn.
Okay, so then if we can go to page 7, 7.30 and 7.31, could you please tell me what that does?
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Chair and Representative Cleaborn, just to confirm, are you looking at the House File 1 or the DE1 amendment?
The DE1, I'm sorry, the DE1, 7.30, 7.31.
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
that's language that when Representative Paul Anderson moved the amendment for the author, it deleted that language.
Okay. It did delete it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure I had a full understanding. And the DE.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, rulemaking is often abdicated to departments and very frequently doesn't have oversight. However, the LAC, which has oversight here on the rulemaking, is bicameral, bipartisan, nonpartisan in its actions. And when you have enforcement, whether law enforcement or other enforcement, to look for crimes, fraud, and issues like that, it is very common not to hand out your playbook to the people that might be perpetrating it. So therefore, there would be some things that you might have set up to be able to do enforcement and catch the fraudsters. So it's not going to be secret in that the LAC, both chambers, both parties, major parties, will be represented in reviewing it. But it is not broadly transmitted, possibly all of it. Some of it might be, but it's not made public data because there are some activities and mechanisms that we don't want the bad actors to be fully informed of. So I fully understand and appreciate that this is no great deviance from common practice of handing off rulemaking, but it does have a wonderful verification and check and balance with the LAC. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So to the A2 Clardy Amendment, Representative Anderson.
I think it's pretty obvious that it makes sense to not remove that language because this is the language that is standard. It's the language that's currently within the Legislative Audit Office. And so I would ask for a no vote on the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other
Excuse me.
lead, Cleaborn.
Thank you. Well, I disagree with you. I think that when we are going to establish secret procedures and secret rules, I think that the public should have a right to at least have an ability to hear that. So I would ask our team to vote yes in favor of the amendment.
And Representative Koznick has a last-minute comment.
Well,
Representative
I was just
Koznick.
going to suggest that I appreciate the line of questioning and the concerns about rulemaking. Generally, I have a lot of concerns about rulemaking in the context of other departments. However, the nonpartisan explanation and the nature of what's in this bill and the context that it's in, I'm satisfied with and comfortable that it's part of the necessity of what the AIG would do. So I am against the amendment and support the bill.
Seeing no other commentary, those in favor of the A2? Opposed? The amendment is not adopted. We will then move on to the A3. Representative Howard, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Anderson, first I want to say I really appreciate that there is a purpose statement included in your bill. I think it makes sense to get clear about the problem we're trying to solve and the goal in creating this office, especially really given the broad powers that are included in this bill. But I think we can improve upon it and expand because whether we're talking about private individuals or nonprofit entities or businesses, we shouldn't tolerate anyone who is defrauding the people of Minnesota or our government. And so with that in mind, this purpose statement, I'm just going to read it because it's just a sentence. It would say, the Inspector General must investigate and combat fraud, waste, and abuse committed against the state of Minnesota by private individuals and entities, including but not limited to defrauding public programs, misusing or improperly claiming tax preference or business subsidies, and violating state labor laws. I just want to give one example. So of a kind of fraud that I think this type of office, it absolutely should be in their purview. And that's worker misclassification. If a business misclassifies their worker, they're defrauding the unemployment trust fund of public resources, and it means that other law-abiding businesses are paying more, and not to mention they're defrauding Minnesota workers. You know, that's fraud, and we should be concerned about it. And so this broader definition, if we're going to create this Inspector General and give the carte blanche powers that are included in this bill, helps us really get our arms around all of the different ways that Minnesotans could be defrauded.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I'll speak briefly to this and the next amendment, the A4.
We'll just deal with this amendment first.
Okay. The amendments, I understand where you're going with this, and my fear is that we're bringing in essentially tax policy in the Department of Revenue into essentially this agency. And I haven't talked, I saw these last night, I haven't talked to the Commissioner of Revenue. I would suspect that they would say, or Dolly, who oversees, the labor, I would suspect that they would say, no, this is completely separate and this is our angle. And I'm not sure the OIG should be a tax attorney, essentially. So that's what you're asking. If we're going to talk about business subsidies, tax preferences, it's really delving into tax issues, into business tax issues. Because of that, at this time, I would ask that we don't support the amendment, but I'm willing to talk to Revenue and Dolly and see what their opinion is about this too. So,
Representative Howard.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, I appreciate that. I still would urge a yes vote. I mean, I think we should be agnostic. If the goal is let's prevent the ways that the state of Minnesota and people are being defrauded, we should be agnostic about where that occurs in our state government. And so taking a broader view makes sense to me, and so I'd encourage a yes vote.
Seeing no other questions, as to the A3, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No, the amendment is not adopted. We'll then move on to the A4. And who has the A4?
I do.
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The A4 is similar and about making sure that we're taking the broadest view possible, and it would ensure that we're not just focusing on narrowly on nonprofits, but also entities that secure public resources through economic development subsidies or state tax state tax incentives as well. Again, when you look at the average, for example, amount that a nonprofit gets, it's from a state grant, it's less than $100,000. We have some businesses that secure several $1 million in grants and tax incentives. And so, again, if we're going to be sort of taking a look at all of the ways that Minnesotans and the state of Minnesota could be defrauded, we should take the holistic view and not kind of put blinders on and narrowly focus on just one angle.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I'd say the same thing. I do want to point out, we define essentially recipients of state funds, and it's a private person or an entity under contract with the state that provides benefit goods or services to eligible recipients. This would include way broader than nonprofits. It would include for-profit companies that do work for the state under contract. It would include individuals that maybe as in their individual capacity do work for this, for the state. Again, this is something that I would want to discuss with the Revenue Commission, because I think this is much broader than this language than any OIG would be looking at. It's essentially tax compliance. So,
Representative Howard, follow up?
No, I would just would urge a yes vote.
Okay. Seeing no other comments. Oh, Representative Koznick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to this amendment, but also tailing off the previous amendment, we have state statutes that need to be required, and that is the law, and there are enforcement mechanisms for that. We also have the Office of the Attorney General that enforces the laws that we pass. And so what Representative Anderson's bill helps to do is dive into eliminating and investigating the waste, fraud, and abuse within state government. But the amendments, I think, go a little too far. You'd mentioned wage theft, and we've talked about that in the previous other committees. And there's a lack of enforcement on it before we try to, increase the penalties on that. And so there are already enforcement mechanisms, so I'm concerned with the direction of these amendments that are trying to micromanage what I think is a good and well-intentioned bill. And I think if we try to micromanage it, we're overlooking that there already are statutes that need to be enforced. There's an Office of Attorney General that's in charge of doing a lot of that. And so by trying to add amendments that micromanage the bill is counterproductive.
Thank you, Representative Koznick. Representative Howard.
Mr. Chair, just comment on that to Representative Koznick's comments. I think it's the exact opposite of micromanaging. We're trying to broaden the ability for the Office of Investigative General to target the ways that folks are defrauding Minnesota. To me, if we're creating a more narrow strike zone, that's micromanaging. So this is an opportunity to broaden that.
Thank you, Representative Howard. As to the A4 as moved by Representative Howard, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. The amendment is not adopted. Representative Howard, you have the A5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment deals with two really important topics. And so I'm going to start with the first one, which is just the public accountability within the IG office that we're creating.
Representative Howard moves the A5.
Sorry, move the A5.
Gotcha.
Thank you. So this would ensure that all IG staff are subject to the conflict of interest laws and the state code of ethics. And it would also require the IG and staff to submit statements of economic interest like we do as elected officials. And given the significant and legislative powers, frankly, given to the IG in this bill, this seems like a must. And, we only have to look to what's happening in Washington to know why this is really important, and look no further than Elon Musk. In Washington, we have an unelected, unaccountable bureaucrat and his team who's ravaging the federal government.
Representative Howard, we're going to stick to Minnesota.
Mr. Chair, this is vitally relevant and important because we have to see what's happening. Representative Anderson, in her opening comments, mentioned the federal government as well. And so I would hope for a little latitude because we're creating state policy here, so we should learn from what is going on in other branches of government. Where Elon Musk has significant conflicts of interest while he's attempting to, quote, root out fraud and abuse. Elon Musk's companies have secured $13 billion in government contracts over the last 5 years, while his team is seeking to eliminate contracts for government workers. It was recently reported that he had been in line to get a $400 million contract for armored Teslas. And at the same time, he has sought to dismantle the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, an entity that has purview over some of his businesses. And so, that's outrageous. I think we can all agree it's outrageous, it's unethical. And so as we're creating this office, we need to make sure that we're not, allowing the same type of pervasive, I would say, fraud and abuse to flourish. So that is a key part of this amendment. This amendment also has a provision about data. It would require the IG to maintain a record of all data it requests and accesses and provide that record available to the Legislative Audit Commission. I think more members will talk about this when we get to the bill, but there are massive concerns with the broad scope of data that IG would have the power to access here. And so this is a bare minimum provision, frankly, to safeguard, at least give the LLC a line of sight to the kind of data that would be under the IG's purview. Would encourage a yes vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Howard. I actually look at this as two separate issues, this amendment. I think the first provision, even though I don't agree with your rant about Elon, I do actually think it could be in here. So the first, the conflict of interest provision. The second, my concern is, but this isn't public data, and I'm not sure the OIG should be giving legislators public data either, even members on the Legislative Audit Commission. So that's something that we really would need to talk to the attorneys about, and whether that's even appropriate. I'm not sure that we don't get public data or non-public data from the Legislative Auditor on things. They don't give us that. We shouldn't have access to that. So that's, if you would be willing to split this, I would be open to taking the first section, the conflict of interest, even as a friendly amendment.
Representative Howard?
Mr. Chair, and thanks, Representative Anderson. Could we divide that amendment? We'd be happy to do that.
Sullivan, if you would go to the table. So if I understand, as Mr. Sullivan is making his way to the table, the author of the A5 would like to divide the amendment between lines 1.7 and 1.8 moving forward. Mr. Sullivan, is that your reading as well?
Mr. Chair, I would also, in the first part of the amendment, add the command on line 1.8. It's a technical cleanup that goes along with the first portion of the amendment. So I would advise dividing after line 1.8.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Renumbering is always a good time, and I'll take your advice. So, Representative Howard, your amendment, if I, as the chair, you would like to divide the amendments between lines 1.1 through 1.8? And then as a second amendment, 1.9 through 1.112.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. So moved.
Okay, so Representative Howard makes that motion. So we will dispense with the first part of the A5. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so the first part of the A5, lines 1.1 through 1.8 is adopted. And then we will move to the balance of lines 1.9 through 1.12. And all in favor?
Mr. Chair, just on that.
Representative Howard, quickly.
Yes. I think there's a lot of questions about data that, frankly, I think we can get to on once we're processed through the amendments. I'm happy to withdraw this section of the amendment at this time.
Representative Howard removes the balance of the amendment to the A5. And Mr. Sullivan, do we need to notate that as a now separate amendment or just the divided A5?
Mr. Chair and members, I would just note for the minutes that the second half of the amendment was withdrawn.
Very good, thank you. So the part of the A5 that was not withdrawn has been engrossed into the bill. Okay, now we'll move on to the A6. Representative Freiberg, I believe that's yours.
I think it's the A16. Oh, wait.
I have 6.
Oh, 6. Okay. It
It's
is
early
6.
still.
Sorry, I had a typo in my my personal notes. A question.
Representative Freiberg moves the A6.
Sure, we can move it. But I had a question for the bill author initially. If I may proceed, Mr. Chair.
Please do.
Yeah, thank you. So Representative Anderson, I might have misheard you. It's entirely possible. Did I hear you say in your opening remarks that the grant management provisions will be subsequently moved to the Department of Administration?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Freiberg. Mostly, yes. So throughout the weekend, we again met with some staff, including the Legislative Auditor. Monday, yes, was that only yesterday? The Department of Admin came in, Deputy Commissioner Christensen, who's in the audience, actually, who oversees the current grants management within admin. And she sort of, yes, it was the changes that need to be done make sense. So we will be leaving, frankly, what happens within the grants management and in admin is they really set policies and procedures for grants. It's more of an almost administrative. There's some other things they need to do which hasn't been completed yet, like they're doing a study, if you recall we passed that 2 years ago. They're doing a study to look at a statewide grants management system so that we can more, see things better. But they're doing different things than what the OIG would be doing. And so it makes sense to leave a lot of that function within the way it is. And so this whole section that your amendment relates to is, most of it will probably be removed on Thursday. And we're going to pull that out, but not all of it. So that's the whole nother section is this grants management, essentially agency grants management, how they're drafted. I ask that you give us, and I don't know if you're on HHS, this will be, I'm sure, coming back to this committee at some point too, but let us work and complete the change, which again, getting good input from commissioners, from bipartisan legislators is going to create a better bill here.
Representative Freiberg.
Well, I mean, I guess it's a little strange to have the language, to vote on language that we know is changing and coming out.
Well, Representative Freiberg, to my point of earlier, that was done by your own side of the aisle a number of times over the last several years on several bills. So while it is not always convenient for the members of this committee, it has been done a great many times, and this has several other committee stops and will be dealt with, and then we'll be coming back to this committee so that you can, at that point, then weigh in on all the fun. Representative Freiberg.
That's all fine, Mr. Chair, but, we are still voting on this bill that contains this language, and we have an amendment before us that does take out provisions that are soon to be obsolete. I mean, the bill has an ambitious starting goal. It starts up in Inspector General's office, which is a large task. These grant provisions that this amendment would remove would transfer over 300 employees to that new agency. It would require rulemaking as well as hiring and appointing numerous employees and deputies, and it's effective on July 1st. I mean, it just seems like too big of a goal for one bill in 4.5 months, especially where the language is changing. So, I mean, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear what other members think also, but, it seems like a fair approach would be to take out these provisions here and add them back in a subsequent, add them back in a modified form in a subsequent committee, if that's possible.
Thank you, Representative Freiberg. Lead Cleburne.
Thank you very much. I think this goes to the heart of the problem that we're having today. We received this DE yesterday at noon, which is fine. That's the rules that the chair said. Now we're being told one more time that this bill is going to go through extensive changes, extensive revision. I'm hearing you as the lead author say that the bill will come back to this committee. I just heard the chair say that the bill will come back to this committee. But the issue that I have, and the very concern that I have is, these provisions are under our jurisdiction right now, right? When bills moved through this committee while I was chair, the provisions that were going to be altered later were not in our jurisdiction. These are in our jurisdiction. So we have a bill before us, and I mean no disrespect in this because I hear you say you want to improve the bill. This is not ready for us to discuss today. We are spending the people's time, the people's energy. I mean, it's the very definition of wasted time. And we're talking about ending waste. No, please forgive me. I'm not saying we can't vet something, we can't talk about something, we can't explore something where the rules and the words are shifting as we are talking about them. I mean, I could ask you to go through the bill line by line by line and say to me, this is where we're going to change. Oh, I have no idea, zero idea this morning what we are discussing, what we're voting on, what we're doing. I'm not sure why the bill was brought before the committee yet, if you have a meeting scheduled this evening to totally rewrite the thing. We are spending agency time reviewing these revisions. We are spending, that's the public dollars, right? I mean, I don't understand how this work this morning is helping us get to a better bill because we don't even know what we're discussing. I'm just really frustrated by this.
Representative Anderson.
Representative Claiborne, I understand your frustration. I also think that this is good to have this discussion. It's good to hear, like Representative Howard's comments about some things that should be brought in the bill or talked about the bill. And this is a committee that deals with state government. And so I think it's been very, very productive. The biggest change in this bill will be the section where we move the Office of Grants Management, which isn't 300 employees, it's 9, essentially. But moving that over and moving some of the authority in regards to grants over. It needs to be split out. That is the biggest change, and that is what this amendment goes to. I'm frankly, we didn't have, the next D will probably be done later today. We didn't have the time to, after having the hearing yesterday, to actually make all the changes, but I can tell you that most of this section will be removed from the bill.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Claiborne,
Mr.
briefly.
Chair, this bill is not ready. We just heard the author say, I think we should stop discussion on this bill. I think if you are going to do extensive revisions, I appreciate the fact that you have a storyboard in your head of what you want to see, right? What we discuss in committee is words on pages, right? I can't discuss and have an intelligent conversation with you with the storyboard that's in your head and I don't have the pages, right? And I wholly appreciate the fact that you're trying to make it better. I appreciate that. But for you to be sitting here and telling me that it's going to be totally rewritten this evening, why are we here this morning? And you can say the conversation is productive. It's productive for you because you have the storyboard. We don't have it. It's not productive for us. So until we're all on the same literal page, I think this bill should be laid over. We should lay this bill over right now and come back and discuss it when you have it ready. This is not, so I move that we lay this bill over.
Representative Claiborne moves that the bill be laid on the table. It is a non-debatable motion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. The motion does not prevail, and we will go back to the A6 as offered by Representative Freiberg. Representative Freiberg, closing words.
I think we basically just heard an argument from the author in favor of the amendment. Most of these provisions are coming out, so.
Representative Anderson, last word.
Representative Freiberg, that's true. Actually, most of these provisions will come out. Some things will be brought back in. It's not all of it, but it's most of it, so that is true. And in the spirit of good bipartisan work, which is what this bill needs to be for the good of the state of Minnesota, I would accept this amendment, understanding that there are going to be parts brought back in the next DE. And I think it would make your side of the aisle more comfortable. It certainly would make the Department of Administration a little more comfortable. But I think we should do that. This is important that
A6,
this
all in
is
favor?
bipartisan. So,
Aye. Aye. Opposed? The A6 is engrossed. Representative Anderson, you have testifiers today?
I do not.
I believe there are members of the public that have signed up to testify. I have Stacy Christensen, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Administration. There we are. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Stacy Christensen, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Administration. And as the discussion that you've heard, and I spoke with Representative Anderson this morning, I will be brief. We appreciate continuing to work with Representative Anderson on this bill, and I know that we can make something better. So that is all I will say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. Extra points for brevity. All right, next we have Devin Bruce. Here we go. Mr. Bruce, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Devin Bruce. I'm the Director of Legislative and Political Affairs for the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees, MAPE. We're a union of over 18,500 state workers across all agencies, boards, and commissions, including the OIG offices embedded within all of the agencies. It's a little bit difficult to, since there are many moving parts now as part of this bill, but specific pieces that I want to highlight that are currently written in here are among the classifications. So particularly for those who are unfamiliar with Minnesota's civil service system, the difference between classified and unclassified service boils down to procedures, particularly around hiring and firing of employees, and their rights regarding discipline and termination. Classified employees are hired through merit-based competitive selection process and can only be fired for just cause. Classified employees covered by collective bargaining agreements, such as the ones who are here being declassified, offer even greater protections, including bidding, bumping rights, recall during layoff. Unclassified positions, however, are typically reserved for employees whose jobs require some duty of loyalty or confidentiality to agency heads for political appointees. The language here in this bill stripping the OIG employees of their classified service designation and union protections is antithetical to the creation of a qualified independent office of Inspector General. And we'd hope that as this bill moves along, that gets changed as it has in the Senate file. Beyond that, the merit-based competitive hiring processes and protections that are being removed from the OIG, the bill currently only makes grant management and oversight more difficult, and oversight will be much more difficult among agencies. As Commissioner Erin Campbell highlights in her letter, there's a tremendous amount of interdepartmental and interagency communication and collaboration needed to oversee grants, from licensing to investigation that simply embedding legislative employees in the executive branch will not solve. So we're happy to hear that this section is currently being worked on and hopefully will be addressed. And lastly, one thing that I want to point out in case it doesn't change is that the bill attempts to consolidate functions for OIG by eliminating OIG offices across the several agencies. Yet eliminating particularly the DHS OIG entirely would functionally impair the state oversight abilities for areas that are historically most susceptible to fraud. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Center for Medicaid Services only authorizes one agency to oversee and administer Medicaid. And this bill cannot, despite the language currently in the bill, cannot alter this, which was a lesson that we learned particularly during the creation of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, where we needed to establish duplicative services and redundancies to ensure that their information could be shared. This bill does not also address the duplicative investigative authority in the Medicaid programs, particularly and how they would interact between the legislative OIG, DHS, but also with the Office of the Attorney General Medicaid Fraud Unit. So we're hoping that as this bill moves forward, that many of these problems will be addressed, and hopefully we can see a better product at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. That is all the testifiers that we had that signed up. Is there any member of the public that wishes to testify? Any public testifiers? Seeing none, we will move on to member discussion. And members, once again, I want to remind you that we have the room at 6:30 only if we need. So if we could keep our questions brief, and I will say this on behalf of Representative Anderson, this bill is going to see work along the way. She is very open to hearing from you. I believe I asked you yesterday how many members of this side of the aisle had reached out to you, and I believe that number was 0. I'm not 100% sure on that, but please, this is a collaborative opportunity, so let's make the most of it. So I think I had Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on the last testimony, the Legislative Auditor has in the past, for many decades, done audits of government-funded grants, programs, et cetera, and is not underneath any one of the departments of which that function was performed. So therefore, the previously stated concern that would violate federal jurisdiction, regulation, et cetera, it really isn't a statement of fact because SOP has been established. And this that's being initiated or growing here is related quite closely to what the auditor does. And the multifunctional activity is superior than multiple in each area, just because we have repeatedly found bad actors in multiple programs across multiple agencies. And that's why we need the universal look over to find things and stop things and save the waste so the money can go to the people. I support your bill.
Representative Kraft.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Representative Anderson, I've got a few questions. It seems, and I just can't keep track of what's going to be in or out, so if I go down that path, please let me know. But I think the bill envisions OIG as a legislative department, correct? And it seems like some of the powers and duties that your bill grants to the OIG are pretty clearly executive branch functions, such like 8.1, establish and enforce policy and procedure improvements, 8.6, implement alternative strategies for grants management, 8.11, suspend or debar grantees, and 8.21, create general grants management policies and procedures applicable to all executive agencies. Yes, Representative Anderson.
Thank you. We deleted those sections.
Deleted those sections.
Representative Kraft.
Yeah, okay, so then, because these were clearly, I mean, unconstitutional, so, well, so, but
Yeah.
if you,
Representative Kraft,
where, my question
speak through the
is,
chair.
if, yeah, oh, thank you, sorry, Mr. Chair. So my question is, Representative Anderson, if you're making such substantive changes, and now you have a process here to do them, like, why did you think this was okay initially? Like, this is.
Representative Kraft,
pretty
we're not
clearly-
going to talk about intent, which is what asking someone thinking something okay is. We're going to speak to the fact of the bill and what's not in the bill. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So where, let's see. So how are you planning to address this in the next, and to keep these duties separate in what you're planning? How are you planning to address this?
Representative Anderson?
Thank you,
And let's keep this fairly tight. We're
Yeah,
talking to the bill that's currently in front of the committee, not what might happen at this next stop. And so if you're on that next committee, maybe you can talk about it then. But Representative Anderson, if you'd like to give a preview of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're very cognizant of the separation of powers issues, and we want to make sure that this bill does not violate that. So I can tell you the grant language that was put into this D by staff originally was taken out of the old admin. You know, it was essentially just moved. And are the issues that you brought up from that standpoint. The OIG needs to have authority to oversee in the sense of looking at, you know, investigative authority over grants on top of everything else, on top of the other things that we discussed with Representative Howard, whether it's individuals, businesses, nonprofits, whatever those things are. They need to have that authority, but they shouldn't be setting grant standards for the agencies,
Representative
because that
Kraft.
is the issue, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. Another question I have, and I think this stuff is stuff that's staying in the bill. Can you, if I read the definitions of the term abuse and waste, they sound identical. Are they identical? Are they different?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. The term waste is subjective, and, we need to be careful what we write in here, because anyone can define waste, however they want, right? So we all have different visions of that. So we do have to be careful within the language in the final, that we're not mandating that every person's idea that, this Kleenex is wasted here, because we shouldn't be buying Kleenex for people, right? They should bring their own, that's waste, and all of a sudden that falls under the OIG. So does that answer your question? That's my.
Representative Kraft.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, no, it does not. What I'm saying is, I'm trying to understand, we hear a lot about waste, fraud, and abuse. And so fraud, I think, is a well-understood term. Waste and abuse, I don't know. So I'm looking at how you're defining them in this legislation. And as I read them, the definitions sound exactly the same to me. And then I would also ask, we certainly have examples of fraud, but then if you have them in here, do you have specific examples of waste and abuse you're trying to address?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. Can you give me, so I don't have to sit and
Okay,
reread the bill? So,
lines 215 to
Representative Kraft will talk to the chair.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, my apologies.
Thank you.
Representative Anderson, lines 215 to 217, and lines 38 to 39. I can read them if you'd like.
No.
Okay.
yeah.
Representative Anderson.
Mr. Chair, abuse, any actions directly or indirectly result in unnecessary cost. Really, it's abuse may involve paying for items and services when there's no legal entitlement. Essentially, paying for services that are not received. That would be the definition of abuse.
Representative Kraft.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, okay, so abuse means actions that may directly or indirectly result in unnecessary cost to a program. And then the other thing is may. If I turn to waste, waste means practices that directly or indirectly result in unnecessary program cost. It does flip a word, cost of program and program cost, including but not limited to the misuse of resources. So these things sound the same. Why do we need them both? And do you have examples of these things where we're happening in state government? I get fraud, but I hear waste, fraud, and abuse, and what are these things?
Representative Anderson.
Again, Representative Howard, waste is, everybody would have their own definition of things that are wasted, and I agree with that. Abuse, and I understand your concern about the language is similar to the two, and maybe you can suggest a language change for the unnecessary cost to the program under abuse. But clearly, paying for items or services when there's no legal entitlement to that would be abuse. So,
Representative Kraft, we done? Or another question? Nope. Okay, thank you, Representative Kraft. I have Representative Howard. Did you have a question? Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson. I did have some more questions about the powers we're giving to the IG related to data. And so I'm looking particularly at line 5.15, where we're saying that we're requiring the commissioner or chief executive officer of an agency to provide full and unrestricted access to all government data, regardless of classification, created and maintained by the agency. And then on 5.18, we're also saying that we're requiring the recipient of state funds to provide the full and unrestricted access to all records, reports, plans, contracts, memos, correspondence, and other information created or maintained by the recipients. So I read that maintained by the recipients, that could mean, private data from individuals if they're maintained by that organization. And so when I look at, for example, the Fourth Amendment to their Constitution, the right against, illegal search and seizures, do you have Fourth Amendment concerns with this broad powers that we're giving the OIG over data that they could have access to?
Representative Anderson.
Representative Howard, no, I don't, because these are choices. These are choices for the entities, for the businesses, for the nonprofits to essentially join and get, whether they're grant dollars or they're providing services, they're choices, and they're made under these guys. But this does go to one of your earlier discussions, your earlier amendments about whether this data, which the OIG would have, most law enforcement, others. I think this is pretty standard language taken nationally from the OIGs, but it goes to the whole point of whether the Legislative Audit Commission members should have access to this, what requested, which I would say no, that we shouldn't as legislators have access to this. This needs to stay within the regulatory body.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, I get the choice for the organizations, but I'm concerned about entities or people whose information is maintained by those organizations. For example, let's say you have let's say an evangelical Christian private school, as an example, and in OIG would want to target that entity for potential, fraud, waste, abuse, what have you. That's an entity that receives non-public pupil aid, public dollars, so puts it under the power over the IAG, and they hold the private information of, the credit card information, the checking accounts of the families that attend that school. Would that data now be under the purview of the IG to rifle through?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Nash. If the OIG determines that there is an investigative reason because there's potential fraud, then yes, that would be, just like in any of the regulatory, oversight entities. So the answer would be yes, if it is determined that there's fraud. I can say that if we took a look a little closer, at all, right, at some of the agencies that were defrauding the state of Minnesota and the feds in the last 5 years, and looked at their records, we would have found this immediately. So we need to have access to this.
Representative
The
Howard.
OIG needs to, not us as legislators. The OIG needs to have access.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, just the broad powers that we're giving this OIG, when you look again, what's happening in Washington, D.C., where folks have, for example, targeted faith-based organizations. Elon Musk called Lutheran Social Services an illegal money laundering scheme for its effort to care for people with disabilities. So if we're giving these extraordinary powers to the office, to the OIG, I think being hyper concerned about what data they have access to, it really merits our concern. If there's a criminal investigation, folks have to go to a judge and get a search warrant to get access to some of this information, and we're just giving extraordinary powers here. So as this bill develops, I would ask that you consider kind of what can we do to make sure we're protecting people's personal data, and I think that there's areas for improvement in this powers section.
Thank you, Representative Howard. Representative Bonner.
I have a couple quick ones, Mr. Chair.
Representative Bonner, to your questions.
First, well, I'll start with a quick comment. I do appreciate what we're trying to do here, and I actually really appreciate your openness to work with folks and your flexibility. So I just want to start with that I appreciate that. I will say on the data practices piece briefly before I get to my question, I think best practice is really to restrict to the least amount of data necessary to prevent abuse, to prevent that data from falling into the wrong hands. And I would encourage you to look through those provisions and take them very seriously. Second, I'm still a little bit confused about this idea of the definitions between fraud, waste, and abuse. And I understand fraud, I think we all do. I don't think there's much debate there. But when we asked about, for example, waste and abuse, I worry about those terms, one, to the point you made. Waste is a little bit subjective, right? What I think is wasteful may not be wasteful to you. My husband thinks that it's wasteful for me to leave the light on when I'm going to come back in the room 5 minutes later. I do not see that as wasteful, right? So I think my question is, you had said that abuse was when you're entitled or when you are not entitled to payment for something, for example, and you receive payment for that. To me, that's the definition of fraud, plain and simple. So I guess I'm still struggling with, and we hear these terms put together so often that I think we don't objectively think about the difference between what they mean and how we define them. And if we're here to actually enforce law, I guess I'm trying to understand, one, how we better define those terms and your thoughts on that. Two, if we better define those terms, if we're not objective in those terms or we're using terms that aren't necessary, how do we enforce that? Because I think the concept of waste and abuse in particular are really difficult items to pin down. As you mentioned, they're subjective. So how do we enforce that? So the first piece is, how do we better define those and how your view on that? And second, how do we actually legislate or enforce the piece around waste and abuse? Because those really are objective or subjective concepts.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I agree with you. I mean, especially in regards to the waste question, how do you define that? Abuse is a little less subjective, but it's still somewhat subjective. Where does abuse cross the line into fraud? Is fraud an in-depth, long-term attempt to do something knowing it's wrong, and to gain from that? Is abuse just the ability to gain something that you're not entitled to, whether you're a business or a person or, you're not entitled to? It's kind of wrong, but it doesn't cross the line as to mean this huge, So I understand where you're going, and I'll think about it. Thank you.
Representative Bonner, anything further? Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Anderson. I just have one basic question. It's around staffing. I think we can all agree that state employees provide important public services, and that they have a lot of important institutional knowledge, and we want to value that. We're unfortunately seeing at the federal level that that is not being recognized, and there are huge purges, and especially you have unclassified roles. And so, I noticed in your bill that it puts the entirety of the IG staff into unclassified roles, and we heard that from the representative from MAPE. And so I'm wondering, why are we removing civil service protections for those workers?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. The Office of the Legislative Auditor is exactly the same way. They are all in the unclassified service. It's never been an issue. And so we were just essentially doing the same and similar with the Legislative Audit Office. So that was a lot. And let me just, I don't know what the members know about my history from years ago, but I actually was the commissioner of the Department of Employee Relations for a while, and I merged that agency into MMB and others. But I'm very well aware and have worked with the unions in my past life.
Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Anderson. I'm wondering if I can bring up Judy Randall to talk more about this and ask her a question.
Ms. Randall, are you willing to testify? Please make your way to the testifier's table, introduce yourself for the record, and proceed.
You're clerical in the union. Go ahead.
Representative Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Randall, for coming up. So I have questions about kind of the classification of workers and how you see them.
Did you want to state the question, Representative Jones?
So especially in regards to how, so the OIG is proposed to have unclassified staff, and how is it that is congruent or incongruent with other bodies within our state government?
Ms. Randall, if you would, introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, for the record, my name is Judy Randall, Legislative Auditor. Thanks for having me up here. Note to self, watch from my office on TV going forward. Thank you, Representative Jones. I'm not going to have an opinion on how the staff in the OIG are classified, but I can tell you how the staff at OLA are classified, if that would be helpful. We have a mix of different classifications at OLA. The legislative auditor and the deputy legislative auditors are unclassified and appointed to a term. There are the support staff that directly serve the legislative auditor and the deputy legislative auditor are unclassified and are not appointed to a term. And then the remainder of the office are in the classified service, but they are not in a collective bargaining unit. They are under the commissioners and managerial plan.
Representative Jones.
No further questions, thank you.
Okay. Lead Cleaver, did you wish to conclude? And I will give you that, and then we're going to move to a vote.
All right, thank you very much. And again, it's difficult to discuss a bill that I know is in absolute flux. So I'll just start kind of at the beginning. So when you,
Brevity is always at a premium.
I appreciate that, but if they're going to be discussing it this evening, Representative Anderson has asked for ideas that would make the bill better. Is that correct?
And brevity is at a premium so that we don't have to be here this evening.
Well, you know, I voted to lay, I didn't vote, but I moved to lay the bill over so they would have the time to do their work. So my question to you is, when in the very beginning of the bill, line 1.12 and 1.13, it talks about the commission must ensure that the inspector general is complementary and not duplicative, which I appreciate. Can you please tell me how much time it will take the commission to do that work? I mean, the Legislative Audit Commission doesn't generally meet that often. So how much time are you expecting that the commission will take to make sure that that work is not duplicative?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. The Legislative Audit Commission, is that your?
Well, it says the commission, isn't it? Oh, apology. So,
Okay.
sorry. Chair.
Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you. First of all, in the way we draft the bill, that will be a big part of it, so that they're not, I know there's been other bills or thoughts out there about essentially duplicating. In fact, the Senate file started out that way, where it was duplicating what the legislative auditor did. So part of it is in drafting the specific duties, and so I don't think it's going to take a lot of time for us as the Legislative Audit Commission to make sure that it's not the same thing, because it's not going to be the same duties to begin with.
Lead Cleaver.
Thank you. Representative Anderson, how often does the Legislative Audit Commission currently meet?
Representative Anderson.
Well, we haven't met this year because my understanding is the Democrats in the House still have not named their members, so maybe we'll get that done. But we typically meet at least once a month, and more often, we meet all year round. We have last year, so cycle, I was the chair of the audit subcommittee. We met regularly looking at it was a smaller group, looking at individual agencies' audits on top of the larger Legislative Audit Commission. Representative Quam is going to be the vice chair of the Audit Commission this year. The House Republicans have it. It will be the Senate Democrats that chair it this year. But as soon as we meet.
Thank you. If you will go to line 2.28.
To your question?
So I would, you've given really broad powers, very broad powers. And so on this particular line, 2.28, it says in the definition of Inspector General or designee. And I would like to see some parameters around designee, right? Because that could be anybody, right?
Representative Anderson? And perhaps that's something
Yeah.
you can tighten up in conjunction with Representative Cleaborn as we proceed.
Thank you.
To your next question, Lead Cleaborn.
Okay, so on page 11, please, let me go back to page, oh wait, page 11 has been deleted now, correct?
Representative
correct.
Anderson?
Okay. Okay.
That being the case, Lead Cleaborn?
So,
Do you know what? I think I'm just going to leave it in that, I see this bill kind of as a shadow executive, you know. When reading the NCSL report on OIGs, I did not see any other OIG that had such legislative control or power. So I see if we try to set this up using the Legislative Audit Commission, we are really setting up a shadow executive. So we are charging the executive to do jobs, and then we are saying, but not really, we will tell you with these powers and duties as written in this current bill. We will tell you, we will direct what you can and cannot do. I think there are opportunities if you, I mean, I love it that we have confidence in ourselves as legislators to make sure that we are hiring the perfect individuals. Even when you look at the definition for the skill set as it's written, because it's a lot of commas and not ors, I don't think you're going to find that individual as that qualifying definition is currently written. So I would encourage you to look at that as well. We need to be really clear about all of the work we do, at every comma, every word, because this position is so incredibly powerful. And it will be incredibly lacking of knowledge if we do everything in a centralized way and that we do not have the department line expertise and collaboration and coordination that embedded OIGs would have. So while I appreciate the fact that you're trying to root out fraud, I believe that this bill will actually open the door and provide more opportunity because the details, the specifics are where the criminal actors go. They go and look for the minutia. Where is the opening? So it's just like a computer system. Every door in is a door out. Every door out is a door in. And when you have a group that is not really, really knowledgeable of the details, and they have to sign off on every grant, you're going to open up avenues for fraud. And so I know that's not your intention, but I think that's the opportunity with this bill. The other thing is I'm asking, are you working with the AG on this language as well?
Representative Anderson?
Thank you, Representative. We have not so far, but we're more than willing to work with the AG.
Lead Cleaborn,
Chair,
conclusion?
this will be my last statement. So as you are going forward, one, I would appreciate an opportunity to work with you. So I would appreciate an invitation to that meeting that you're going to have this evening and the details of where that meeting will be, and to be able to bring my staff to that meeting as well if they're able to come. Secondly, when you're doing this, we have to make sure that the coordination between the federal law and the state law occurs. We can't do anything to jeopardize our older American dollars or our Medicaid dollars or any of those, because you know the pain and suffering would be real in our state if that happened. And I would encourage you to work with the OIG. We have invested a lot of money in that fraud division, and so we want to make sure that we are using all of our resources for prevention, right? That is the best tool. Prevention is the best tool. So I appreciate this, and I'll look forward to that invitation to talk with you. And I would really encourage you, if you've not read this document, the NCSL document, it might be very helpful and informative to you in going forward. Thank you.
Representative Anderson, brief closing remarks to your bill.
No, I have none, and I'll get you the information.
With that, Representative P.H. Anderson renews his motion to refer House File 1 to Human Services and Finance Policy. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. The bill is on its way.